What is going on, guys? It's Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. With me tonight is co-host Mr. PigSkinPapers Dave Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing great, Paul. I'm excited for some playoff football. These 17-week regular seasons are really long, but hopefully the playoffs will be worth the wait. Now we got 4 weeks of it, so I'm excited for it.
Well, Dave, I know the 17-week season is long, but the off season is even longer. Would you agree?
Yeah, and it's why I think the NFL draft has become such a huge event. I remember when the NFL draft wasn't even on a network, like say 25 years ago, and really only like diehard NFL fans paid that much attention to it and kind of followed it in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And now, of course, it's a 3-day spectacle, first night in prime time. But I think it's partly because the off season's so long and people just, are so into the NFL that, by the time the draft comes around, it's been almost 3 months since the Super Bowl and still a couple months before training camp. So I think it's just, it's just a testament to how popular the NFL is that anyone cares that much about the draft. So yeah, the off season's long. That's my long way of answering your question.
Yeah, no problem. And I think fantasy football just in the last 10 years has helped the NFL draft become like an event.
I agree, and especially the emergence of dynasty, right? Because in dynasty, you really have to know not just who the first round receivers, backs, and quarterbacks and tight ends are, but you have to know, kind of the whole draft, or at least the first 4 rounds, let's say, guys who could make an impact within the next couple of years. So I agree with you. I mean, I think fantasy football has done a lot to improve the NFL's popularity and also just, and like you said, to get people more interested in the draft.
Right. Well, Dave, as always, I'm excited for our discussion tonight. Before we get into it, let the people know where they can find you on Twitter.
Great. Thank you, Paul. You can find me at PigSkinPapers. Both of the P's are capitalized, and my blog where I post NFL and fantasy football content is thepigSkinPapers.com. And right now I have an article up, which is a wildcard weekend preview where I go through all 6 of the games, go through the main storylines, break down, an analytical breakdown of the offense and defense for both teams, and I give a score prediction, which we'll get into at some point in this episode. Paul, where can people find you on Twitter, and where can they find your content?
Yes, guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. All of my content is there.
Okay, great.
Well, Dave, we're going to talk some playoffs, but before that, I found week 18 to be pretty interesting. There were some things that stood out to me. Was there anything that stood out to you on week 18?
Yeah, and week 18 is always a strange one because there are teams with nothing to play for, there are teams with everything to play for, and then there are teams that are somewhere in the middle that might have a little bit to play for. They might have something to play for depending on what's happening in other games. There are teams that want to, see what they have. A good example, Sam Howell getting a start for the Commanders the last week of the season. He hadn't played at all. They had Wentz and Heineke, but, gave him the start week 18. And I'll start there because for me, what stood out was how bad the Cowboys played in week 18. That to me was kind of a shocker because they did have something potentially to play for.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they figured the Eagles would win. The Giants, couldn't improve their seeding. And unlike the Chargers, the Giants were smart and didn't play their top offensive players and gave them a week off. And so I think the Cowboys kind of knew the game didn't matter. But having said that, they did play their starters. They didn't know it wasn't going to matter when the game started.
Right.
And, that was – I watched a lot of that game. I was in a sports bar, which is always fun. For any week, but for the last week of the season. And the 2 screens I had on right in front of me were the Seahawks and Rams, which was a game I think everyone was very interested in, because if the Rams, who lost in overtime, could have pulled that off, then the Lions, would have had a chance to get in the playoffs in addition to the Packers in the Sunday night game. And the other game that was on right in front of me was the Cowboys and the Commanders. And I mean, that performance by Dallas was one of the worst performances of any team any week this entire season. I mean, I think they had something like 180 yards of total offense. They averaged like 3 yards per play. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't throw the ball. Dak did not look like the QB who's been around for 6 or 7 years. He looked like the one making his first NFL start, as opposed to how, he threw a pick six and got lucky. It got called back by penalty, and then immediately threw another one that actually counted. They just look. I mean, any team can not show up for an NFL game, and NFL teams are talented, and the Commanders had nothing to play for, so they had everything to play for. They played hard. They were at home. They hate the Cowboys. I get all of that. But Dallas is going into the playoffs this week in a matchup that's, very anticipated, a rematch of their week 1 game with the Bucs. And I was just very, that jumped out at me how terrible they looked. And I'm sure they'll play a lot better this week, but that kind of performance stood out for me. And there were others as well, but for you, what kind of stood out for you from the week we just saw?
For me, Dave, it was the Dolphins defense. They scratched and they clawed their way to that final playoff spot. And you look at it, Skylar Thompson didn't really have a good game, but I mentioned the defense. They held Joe Flacco and the Jet offense to less than 200 total yards and 6 points. I found that to be really impressive.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, the one thing I'll say about that is I don't think the Jets scored a touchdown in their last 3 games. They really kind of fell apart at the end of the season offensively. It's sort of funny, though, because my big takeaway from week 18 was the Cowboys, and yours was the Dolphins. And for those who are new to the show, Paul is a big Cowboy fan, and I'm a big Dolphin fan, and we got both of our teams in the playoffs, so that's exciting. But that's just kind of funny. But yeah, Miami's defense did play very well, because I think, and they didn't let Thompson do much in that game. I mean, the Jets have a good defense, and I think, that game in the second half, and I watched all of that game. It sort of looked like, all right, whoever was going to turn over the ball was going to lose, right? Like it was a field goal game. And both teams seemed pretty content to punt the ball away and let their defense try to win the game. Other than Raheem Mostert, I mean, he was running really well, and I think Miami was content to let him run and not let Thompson lose the game for them.
Yeah,
and then they got that 15-yard. They got a horse collar penalty, which kind of put them in position to kick the game-winning field goal. And then for the gamblers out there, if you bet the Jets, it was one of the all-time bad beats, because the line was 3.5. I don't know if you know what happened, but the line was 3.5. The Dolphins kick a field goal with 18 seconds left to go up 3. The Jets get the ball, and then they run one of these, 10 laterals, and the ball ends up going out of the end zone, and the Dolphins get a safety and win by 5 and cover. So that's why, kids, if you're out there, don't bet on sports.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's stick with week 18. What was the biggest surprise of the week for you? And I don't mean just the games, but kind of anything around the NFL in week 18. What was your biggest surprise?
The biggest surprise for me, Dave, is I hear these reports about Sean McVay potentially leaving the Los Angeles Rams, and reason being is that he doesn't want to be part of a rebuild. But that story literally shocked me.
Yeah, that is pretty surprising. I know he likes doing TV, and there were rumors, I think, before this season that he might leave the sidelines and go into the booth. The funny thing is, I think he's still the youngest coach in the NFL, and if he's not, it's like him and Mike McDaniel and Zach Taylor are all, somewhere in their late 30s or right around 40. So he's still presumably got a lot of coaching days in front of him, but I hear you. That was pretty surprising to hear. I think for me, the most surprising thing of the week was everything that happened with the Texans and how they ended up not having the first pick. Because all they needed to do is lose that game. And I know teams don't try to lose, and they shouldn't. But the Texans, I believe, let Lovie Smith know before the game that he was getting fired, right? So now you have your coach who's no longer connected to the fortunes of the team and doesn't care if they win and wants to go out and win his last game. And then to win, and the game went back and forth, and the Colts aren't a good team. They're not a good team. The game went back and forth, and the Texans end up winning by converting a 4th and 20, then getting a touchdown, then going for 2 and getting it. And the net result of all of that is that the Bears have the first pick in the draft and the Texans have the second pick. And, the way all of that unfolded and that whole result is just surprising to me that the Texans didn't have the good sense to not win that game and also maybe to wait till after the game to fire their coach.
Right.
So, that he's not completely disconnected from the fortunes of the team. But it's sort of, the Texans were the worst team in the league all year, and they were the worst team at losing and apparently at winning. At winning, apparently at losing. And it makes a difference, like the Bears, you could look at it and say, well, the Bears don't need a quarterback because they have Justin Fields. And I know there have been some rumors that maybe they'll move on from Fields, try to trade him, and then take another quarterback. I don't see them doing that. I think that's just sort of wishful thinking for some people. But it's valuable to have that pick, and someone's going to want it, and someone's going to jump ahead of it. Because if the Bears stay there, they're not taking a quarterback. But someone will probably give them a nice package and trade up, and the Texans will end up getting their second choice instead of their first choice. So, so that just besides the Cowboys, like I said before, that was both Texas teams surprised me this week. Let's say that.
Yep, definitely. You mentioned that you watched all the games on Sunday. I imagine you watched Aaron Rodgers, the way he was at Lambeau, the way that game ended, and kind of how he was taking it all in. It's almost like he was maybe realizing that it was his final game there at Lambeau. Do you think we saw Aaron Rodgers' final game, or at least final game with Green Bay?
It's a really good question, and one that has already if you look around, there's a lot of articles on that already. I mean, he's going to be 40 by the time next season starts. And traditionally, kind of before Brady, it was almost unheard of that QBs would play past 40. And usually as they got into their late 30s, they looked like Eli Manning or Ben Roethlisberger, Brett Favre at the very end. Brady's kind of the exception. But Rodgers, I think, like Brady, could play into his 40s and could be good into his 40s. This was not Rodgers' best season, but he also wasn't terrible. They didn't have, they kind of were relying on Allen Lazard and 2 rookies and running backs. And Bakhtiari was out for a while. In terms of the question you asked, I think there are 60 million reasons why Aaron Rodgers will play next year. He's signed, he gets $60 million if he plays next year. So I know he said he's going to evaluate, but I can't see him, at some point more money doesn't matter to these guys. And he was like the first one to get $100 million guaranteed, I think, or maybe it was 150 when he, signed the deal he signed. It's since been blown out of the water by other quarterbacks, but I do think he'll play next year. The question is, will he play with the Packers? And from the Packers standpoint, Jordan Love is going into the last year of his rookie deal, and they really haven't seen whether he can play. He's gotten very limited opportunity. So I could see if someone offers them a lot, like a team like the Jets, or, I think if they trade him, they would prefer to trade him to the AFC, but maybe at this stage, they don't really care that much. It's not like he's going to bedevil them for 5 more years. So, maybe the Saints or the Panthers, like there are QB needy teams in the NFL.
Yeah.
The Raiders is sort of an obvious one too. Maybe the Bucks. So I could see if someone offers them something that they're willing to take, that Rodgers is playing somewhere else. I could also see him being in Green Bay next year. What do you think, Paul?
Well, before I answer that question, Dave, it's interesting about Jordan Love, and you think about what Aaron Rodgers, the money that he's going to be making. I'd be interested to see if a team, instead of trying to trade for Aaron Rodgers, maybe tries to make a play for Jordan Love, like a low risk move. But maybe that's a better conversation for the offseason.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I just don't know that he's shown enough that they would get enough for him. But when you think about Rodgers and how long he had to wait behind Brett Favre, and he was a first round pick also.
Exactly.
That's kind of the way Green Bay has done it forever. But you'd hate to see like a first round quarterback on a rookie deal who really didn't get a chance to play for the team who drafted him, and then they don't know what to do with him. They could pick up the 5th-year option on him too, if Rodgers stays for one more year, but they won't know. They just don't know what they have in Jordan Love, and maybe they get to see him practice, so maybe they obviously know more than you do or I do. But obviously, look, the Aaron Rodgers saga is one like the Brady saga every year that people are going to get tired of pretty quickly, but he is one of the biggest names in the sport. He's a 4-time MVP, a 1-time Super Bowl champ. And so, yeah, it'll be a topic that we get sick of by the beginning of next season.
Absolutely. So to answer the question, Dave, did we see Aaron Rodgers play either his final game or his final game with Green Bay? If we did see anything, I think it would be his final game. I can't picture Aaron Rodgers playing for another team other than Green Bay. And I think for his legacy, he'd be wise to finish it in Green Bay. Just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think it – are you thinking back to Favre? Like I'm thinking of like Minnesota Favre and New York Jets Favre. It kind of – he was such a Packer, down to his core. I know he was drafted by Atlanta, but he never really played for them. But, it was weird seeing Brett Favre in other uniforms. And I agree with, but it's weird seeing Tom Brady. Now we're used to it, but,
yeah.
But like Elway, Marino, like a lot of these guys never played for another team. I hear what you're saying. All right. Sticking with stuff that happened this weekend and kind of reacting to week 18, several coaches predictably got fired. It happens every year. What did you think about the coach firings, and any of it surprise you, or do you think it was kind of the ones you were expecting?
No, honestly, when I heard that Cliff Kingsbury got fired, my reaction to it was like, well, it's about time, just because I felt like he had gotten opportunity, and while they did make the playoffs last year, they always seem to. I know Kyler gets injured and everything, but they always. They never seem to meet expectations, and you think about the relationship between Kyler and Cliff Kingsbury. I just felt like it was time, but no, outside of that, I wasn't surprised at all, and I do agree with that with all of the coaches that did get fired. How about you?
Yeah, I did too. I guess 2 comments I'll make on Kingsbury. They extended him, and they extended the GM Keim. The amount of money that NFL teams are paying to fired coaches is astonishing. I saw the number the other day. Unfortunately, I didn't write it down, but it's in like the over $100 million. I forget what the exact number is. Or some absurd amount of money. And so, maybe the lesson is that NFL teams, I know they will, like when they want to get their guy, they kind of, they make these big offers to these unproven coaches or proven at the college level. And if you look at the list of coaches from the college ranks who've come into the NFL in the last, say, 10 or 15 years, it's not a good track record at all.
Right.
Very few of them have winning records, guys who are sort of like big college coaches. And so, I think the lesson here is that NFL teams need to be a little smarter about how many years they give to coaches, with these big contracts. and right out of the gate, like guys who don't yet have NFL experiences, and when they extend them. I guess the one other thing I'll say is, the one coach who I thought might be on the hot seat was Ron Rivera.
That's a good one.
And I don't think that Cowboys game saved him or anything. I mean, I think whatever decision was made before then. They did fire their offensive coordinator, Scott Turner. But it looks like they're going to keep Rivera. I guess the one thing to keep an eye on there is if, in fact, the team gets sold, then, kind of all bets are off. But they probably like Rivera there. He made the playoffs last year. The team was close to 500 this season, which I think, they're in a tough division. But he was one person who I thought maybe might have gotten canned, and it looks like for now he's safe. So that's my answer on that one.
Dave, we saw some teams get eliminated from playoff contention in Week 18. When you look at the teams that didn't make the playoffs this year, what are some that you think might be playoff teams in 2023?
Good question. Half the teams that made the playoffs this year didn't make it last year, right? So that's a big number. And if you look at the AFC, you might say, well, look, the Bengals, the Chiefs, and the Bills are the three best teams in the AFC, and last year they were all division winners. So, they're back, and the Cowboys and the Bucks won divisions last year, and they're back, although the Cowboys are back as a wild card, and the 49ers went to the NFC title game, and they're back. But there really was a decent amount of turnover this year. 7 out of 14 is a lot. And if you go back and look, 33 years in a row, at least 4 new teams have made the playoffs, which I think that would surprise. Yeah, that's a surprising statistic. And especially because for a lot of those years, there were not 14 playoff teams, there were 12. So it's logical to think that there are going to be several teams next year that didn't make the playoffs this year that are going to make it next year. I think the obvious choice, first of all, I think it's going to be a little easier in the NFC. I think the AFC is a little more, there are more kind of good teams at the top that, barring a quarterback injury, you would expect those teams to either be back in the playoffs or be very much in contention. I think the NFC is a little more wide open. A couple teams I look at in the NFC that I think could be in the playoffs next year. I'll give you 3. I mean, the obvious one is the Lions, who are the team that came the closest this year. They've got a really good nucleus. I think Jared Goff is, kind of proved himself this year as a guy they don't need to replace. Like, they can win with him. Interesting. The last 9 games of the season, he didn't throw an interception.
Oh, wow. That's impressive.
In fact, they were the first team. I saw this stat the other day and I almost didn't believe it. They're the first team in NFL history to go 9 straight games scoring 20 points and not throwing an interception.
Oh, wow.
That's how well they played down the stretch and how well he played. But, not only did they have a really good core and I think a good coach and a good environment, but they have the 6th pick in the draft, thanks to the trade they made, the Matt Stafford trade with the Rams. Plus, they have their own first-round pick. So, they're set up to maybe get some more impact players on defense, which is what they need. I don't think their offense needs much, especially Jamison Williams barely played this year, right? So they'll get a full year of him. So the Lions are, kind of an obvious pick. 2 other teams that I think you could see in the playoffs next year, if they can fix their quarterback position, maybe with, picking up a veteran like a Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo, like someone who can just drive the bus, are the Panthers and the Saints. I think that division will be pretty wide open. I think both of those teams are pretty solid, good defenses and, pretty decent personnel. So those are a few. The AFC is harder for me. I guess I'll go with the Steelers just because, I think Kenny Pickett, he got a full season, not a full season, but he got most of this season to develop. I trust Mike Tomlin. I trust their front office to have another good draft. They have, good weapons. So those are mine. What about you? Who are the teams that you think that missed this year that we can look for to be contenders and get in the playoffs next season?
Well, I think the obvious answer for NFC was Detroit, which you already touched on there, Dave. For me, in the AFC, I'll go with the Cleveland Browns. You know, you look at the Browns, and even though they didn't have Deshaun Watson, who missed 11 games, Cleveland still found a way to win 7 games this season, which is more than 7 other teams in the league and tied with 6 others. And you know the Browns' offense had a top 20 passing offense, which will get better with a full season with Watson. They had a top 5 running game and a top 5 secondary. They really just need to fix their run defense, which was bottom 5. But again, I mean, you know, you get a guy like Deshaun Watson, extended drives, things like that. It's a good quarterbacks, good running backs help your defense, and I think the Browns are going to make some noise next year.
That's a good one. I hadn't really thought about them. You know, I was thinking, if you think back on their season, there was that game on Halloween where they kind of like smoked the Bengals. In fact,
Right.
it's the last game the Bengals lost, believe it or not.
Oh man.
Yeah, they've won 8 in a row since then. Plus, they had the no contest against the Bills, and the Browns really beat them, like beat up on them that game.
Yeah, I remember that.
And you know, they kind of looked like world beaters, and then their season kind of just sputtered from there. But that's a good one. I hadn't really thought about the Browns. I mean, that's a tough division. You know, that you know, I don't know what to think about Baltimore right now, but you know, that division had 3 teams with winning records this year, and the Browns were close. So yeah, that's a good one. All right, we're gonna shift now to talk about the playoffs. So
Yes, sir.
regular season's in the books. Super wild card weekend. It's I think the 3rd one now. 3 years ago, the NFL expanded its playoffs, added a 3rd wild card in each conference, got rid of a 2nd bye in each conference. So instead of, you know, a total of 4 games on wild card weekend, we now have 6. And this year we've got a Monday night game, so it's spread over 3 days. A lot of football for the NFL junkie out there. And you know, last year, if you look at wild card weekend or super wild card weekend, whatever you want to call it, the games weren't close. There were a whole bunch of blowouts, and the average margin of victory was like 17 points. I think that Bengal Raider game, I remember being a really good game, went right down to the wire.
Yeah, it did.
And the rest of the games, or most of them anyway, were not close. And, you know, I remember sort of thinking, oh, you know, NFL playoffs, the cream rises to the top. And then after that, the playoffs were unbelievable. I mean, it was like every game after that was just a barn burner. A lot of really close games, you know, a couple overtime games, the crazy Bills Chiefs game. So I'm hoping that, you know, this year's playoffs are as good. I know it's a lot to hope for. I don't know that we're going to get that this weekend. But you never know. I mean, I think, and we'll kind of get into as we go through all of this. We'll hopefully have a chance to talk about each game a little bit. But as you look at the slate of 6 games, underdog, Paul, do you think has the best chance of winning their game outright this weekend?
So, you know, I don't know. Let me ask you this, Dave. I know that they're the higher seed, but it does kind of. Do you get the sense that Jacksonville would be considered the underdog in their matchup?
Well, they're what are they? They're getting a point, right? Or they're getting a point and a half. I mean, I think the Chargers are favored.
Okay.
I haven't looked at the lines in a couple days, or that line I haven't looked at, but I'm pretty sure the Chargers are like giving 1 or giving 1.5. It might even be up to 2. So yeah, I think, and look, they're the I know why you're asking, because the Jaguars are the 4 seed and the Chargers are the 5 seed, and the game's in Jacksonville. But you know, the Chargers had a better record, and I think most people, you know, they had clinched a playoff spot a few weeks ago, and Jacksonville basically had a playoff game to get into the playoffs against the Titans. So I think it's fair. If you want to answer Jacksonville, I think that's a fair answer.
You
Well,
know,
go
I feel like I've been talking about
Make the
Jacksonville just
case.
about every
Make
episode
make
for
the
a month
case.
now.
Make the case. Make the case for
What?
the Jaguars.
No, I was just saying. I think for the last month, I've brought up Jacksonville every week on the pod, Dave, and here we are. They sneak into the playoffs, kind of like how I predicted a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, Jacksonville's going to be my pick. I like the matchup. I think Doug Peterson, you know what he's done with that team, he's really turned them around. Trevor Lawrence has really shown why he was that number one overall pick. The addition of Christian Kirk has made a big difference. Zay Jones has been a difference maker. Evan Ingram. I think I spoke on this last week, but I think the difference maker is going to be at head coaching, and Doug Peterson's going to give Jacksonville the edge.
I like that answer, Paul. That's actually, I was giving you a hard time, and that's my answer also. And, you know, in addition to everything you've said, you know, the Jaguars have won 5 in a row. So if you believe in sort of a hot team coming into the playoffs,
Yeah, momentum.
you know, after San Francisco, who's won 10 in a row, and the Bengals have won 8, you know, I'm not sure how many in a row the Bills have won, but, you know, the Jaguars are right up there, and they needed to win 5 in a row. You know, they were 4-8. So, you know, they needed to do what they did just to get into the playoffs. And I agree with you on the coaching thing. And it's not just the Jaguars coach. I don't really trust Brandon Staley to not, you know, make one either fourth down decision or, you know, time management decision. We've just seen too many games over the past 2 years where he's done head scratching stuff that's either cost the Chargers a game or almost cost them a game. And I do think there's a bit of a coaching disparity here. And while I think the Chargers are probably the more talented team overall and have more, you know, kind of like big name players and playmakers, and I trust Herbert more than I trust Trevor Lawrence. I think if the Jaguars lose this game, it's because Lawrence isn't ready for this moment, and Herbert more is. And that's why I'm a little hesitant to take the Jaguars. And if you look at my column this week, I did take the Jaguars to win the game. But it's not a high conviction pick because I'm a little nervous about Lawrence in a big spot like this. I mean, look, I know he won a national championship in college, so it's not like he's never played in a big game before. He has. But he hasn't played in one in the NFL yet, other than that Titan game, which, you know, the Titans were starting a quarterback they hired off the couch, and it was in Jacksonville. So anyway, I'm gonna stay with your answer. I think of all the underdogs, they're the one I'm picking to win outright.
Hey, I like that answer, Dave. You mentioned the slate of games. We've got 3 days of football on the this weekend, Dave. Well, which day of the playoffs are you most looking forward to watching?
Well, that's a good question because there's 2 games on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, and 1 on Monday. So my juvenile answer is Sunday because there's 3 games, right? It's the most football. But I don't think it's the best 3 games, you know, because it's got the 2 games where a team is playing without its starting quarterback. Now the Dolphins have announced that Tua isn't playing. And just for everyone's benefit, I'll just go through the schedule real quick. The Saturday games, the first game, which is like the 4:00, I'm on the East Coast. So the 4:30 game is the Seahawks at the 49ers. And then the night game is that Jaguar Charger game we were just talking about in Jacksonville. And then Sunday, you got 3 games, Miami at Buffalo at 1. And then the Giants at Minnesota at 4:30, and then the night game, which I think is at like 8:15, is the last of the division matchups. And it's kind of cool. We got 3 division matchups this week because anything can happen in division games. Absolutely. And so that's Ravens at the Bengals, and then the Monday night game, the Cowboys at the Bucks. Pretty good that I remembered all that. Hopefully everything I just is accurate. But, you know, Sunday has the 2 games where a team is likely to be without its starting quarterback on the road against a favored team. And so, you know, those are 2 teams that probably don't have much of a chance to win without their starting quarterback. So in a way, the Sunday games are, you know, that giant against Minnesota game should be a good one. You know, they just played 3 weeks ago. It almost went to overtime, but for a 61-yard field goal from Greg Joseph as time was expiring. I'm going to still say Sunday, just because there are 3 games. But I think, I think Saturday's got a lot to look forward to, and Monday only has 1 game, but it might end up being the best game of the weekend. I'm looking forward to all of it. That's kind of my answer. What about you, Paul? Which day are you most excited for?
Well, like you, I'm looking forward to all of it, David. Of course, being a Cowboys fan, I can't wait for Monday night. That being said, I think Saturday is definitely the better slate of games for me. You talked about, the 2 teams on Sunday missing their starting quarterbacks, but then you mentioned the division games and the Seahawks and 49ers. I think that'll be an interesting third game between those 2 teams. Who can win that third one? Because Seattle won 2 in the regular season. Can they pull off the three-peat, if you will? And then you mentioned we talked a lot about Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. I mean, I've been looking forward to that matchup for a couple of weeks now.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned. So just, we'll just talk real quick about the 3 division games. So the Dolphins and Bills split, and the first game was a 2-point game, which Miami won. But it was a weird game. It was in like real heat and humidity in Miami, and I think the Bills just like melted because the Bills ran 90 plays and the Dolphins ran 39 plays, and I don't think they even got a turnover, and they won by 2 points. I still don't know how they won that game. And then weather was a factor in their second game also. You remember the snow game, or it started snowing. That was a great game, but Tua played in that game, and the Bills ended up, kicked a field goal to break a tie at the end of that game. The Niners and Seahawks played 2 games this year because they're in the same division, and the Niners kind of won both games, one by 8, and the other one they won by 20. And the Bengals and Ravens split this year. The Ravens, they each won at home, just like Miami and Buffalo. So, there's an old saying that it's really hard to beat a team 3 times in one season. The Niners team that's going to try to do that. But we sometimes get division games in the playoffs. We usually get like 1 per year, maybe. And we've already got 3 this year, and we could certainly get an NFC East game or 2 as we move along here. So it'll just sort of be, that's the only division game I think we can get after this week. But in any case, it's interesting with 3 division games this week because you really don't know what will happen when teams that know each other as well as they do and have to play each other twice a year, play each other. And just for a little bit more context on the Seahawks 49ers rivalry, if you will, the 49ers swept them this year, as you said, but over the last 8 seasons before that, the Seahawks 14-2 against the 49ers. So that's all with Russell Wilson, or pretty much all of it, when he was playing a lot better. But it's interesting that Seattle's so much had the upper hand in that rivalry. So just a little nugget to store in the back of your head. So you mentioned the Monday night game for your team, the Cowboys. Do you like the concept of a Monday night game in the playoffs, and do you like the matchup for this Monday game?
Yeah, I like the matchup. I think it'll be a good matchup. Of course, you never know what to expect from Tom Brady. His resume speaks for itself. We know what he's capable of. But this year's Tampa Bay and this year's Tom Brady, I'm not sure really what to expect. So I do like the matchup. I don't think this is a game. How can I say this? The Cowboys can win this game. I guess you can say they should win this game. But it doesn't feel like I'm getting. Last year when the Cowboys had to face the 49ers, I was not confident in that game. I didn't like the way that the Cowboys matched up with the Niners. I'm kind of getting those vibes this year with the Buccaneers. But I think if our pass rush can get home, then and give Tom Brady some trouble, that'll be what sets us apart. I'm just not really sure what to make of the matchup right now because our secondary is so beat up, and Mike Evans, Russell Gage, and Chris Godwin. If you give Tom Brady time, he'll be able to pick you apart. So that's kind of where my uneasiness comes in. But as far as a game being played on Monday night, I don't hate it. I don't really like it. It's just I feel like it's the NFL just trying to get as much juice out of the limit, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, the one thing I don't like about it is I think in the playoffs, whoever wins this game is going to have to play either next Saturday or Sunday, hopefully next Sunday. But either way, they're going to be less rested by at least one day than whoever they play. I mean, and if they play the Eagles, if all the better seeds win, then the winner of this game plays the Eagles, who are already on an extra week of rest. So that's one reason why I don't love them putting a game on Monday night. I think once you get into the playoffs, you should try to make it sort of as fair for everyone. And by having a game on a Monday night, you really are shortening the next week before the divisional round for whoever wins the game. As for the game itself, this is the one I had the most trouble picking. And I think if I hadn't watched the Cowboys game last week and seeing how bad they looked, I think so. This matchup is the one matchup that's been kind of known for like a month. Because I mean, look, in the end, the Cowboys could have won the division. It took the Bucs a little while to kind of nail down the NFC South, but they were always sort of the team that was most likely to win that division. So this, 4 versus 5 has been the most likely playoff matchup for like a month. And these teams played in week 1 and it was a bad game and Dak got hurt. And, it was a 19-3 game with 1 touchdown and 5 field goals. It was first week of the season. Neither team was particularly sharp. So this is and this is the only matchup this weekend of 2 teams that both made the playoffs last year and that came into this season as like, favorites. So it's got, Tom Brady and Dak, who's, a pretty big name also. And the Cowboys are a marquee franchise. Like this is a game that's going to get really hyped up. And I wonder how much the line changed because of how the Cowboys played last week and the Bucs, played a little better 2 weeks ago. So I really had trouble picking a winner in this one because if the Bucs win by 2 touchdowns, I won't be surprised. If the Cowboys win by 2 touchdowns, I'll be a little surprised, but I won't be surprised if the Cowboys win. And I picked them to win the game. And I'm basing that mostly on the whole season's work and not just the last couple weeks. I watched the Bucs a lot this year because they were on TV a lot, and they were not a good team. I mean, they just, week in and week out, like they had so many games where they had like 6 points at the half. And then Brady would, get it going in the fourth quarter, and they had like something like 5 comebacks, which, fourth quarter or second half comebacks, which is a lot. But if you put yourself in that hole in the playoffs, and they did it last year against the Rams, if you remember, and then Cam Akers fumbled twice and they almost came back and won. But coming back is hard. And if they let the Cowboys get out to a lead, and then I think it's going to be a long day for Tampa. So I don't love there being a Monday night game, but I'm looking forward to this one. Long answer.
Yes, sir. Sticking with Dallas and Tampa, we talked a lot about the matchups, but when you look at Dallas and Tampa and Los Angeles and Jacksonville, it's safe to say that these are probably the most balanced matchups on the slate. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the 6 games this weekend, I think you've got 3, and if you look at the lines for the games, it backs this up. I mean, you've got 3 games where the line is 8.5 or more, which is the San Francisco-Seattle game, the Buffalo-Miami game, and the Cincinnati-Baltimore game, and that reflects the fact that Lamar is almost certainly not going to play because the line keeps moving away from the Ravens. I think it opened at 6.5 and it's now at 8.5. And then you've got 3 games where the line is 3 or less. And, so I think you've got basically what it is. You've got 3 games that are not likely to be that close unless it turns out that they are, of course, which you never know what's going to happen in NFL games. But I think the 2 games you mentioned are talent-wise probably the most even matchups. I don't know what to make of the Giants or the Vikings because, when you look at all the metrics, really kind of neither team is as good as their record, and especially the Vikings. But they played 3 weeks ago, and like I said, the game was a field goal game that really should have almost went to overtime. So I would add that as a 3rd game to your list, just in terms of, kind of what looks like on paper a pretty even matchup. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. We talked a lot about Jacksonville and Los Angeles. We just touched on Dallas and Tampa Bay, but you look at Cincinnati and Baltimore. I mean, there's a chance that Baltimore's 3rd string quarterback might be playing in this game. And then you look at Buffalo and Miami, and Skylar Thompson's going to be the starter of that one. He's their 3rd string. He's a rookie as well. It's just, he's neither one of those guys is ready for the playoffs. We saw Anthony Brown, I believe is his name, for the Baltimore Ravens. We saw in his first start of the season, he had at least 2 interceptions. Ravens didn't have a very good game. I just, the quarterback makes such a difference. It's hard to, especially in this environment, when you don't have your starting quarterback, it's hard to win these games against experienced playoff teams.
I agree with that, unless you're the 49ers.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. They're starting a quarterback who was drafted after any other rookie this year, right? Because he was the last pick
Right.
draft, and he's a 3rd stringer. But I think the difference is, first of all, he's got 6 games under his belt, right? Because he, all of which he won, or they won. The quarterback doesn't act alone. He's in that Shanahan system, which, is easy in a lot of ways, is just so designed for quarterbacks to succeed and learn it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got great playmakers around him, a really good offensive line. I'm not worried. I hear everything you say, and I agree with you. I think Huntley might start for the Ravens, which would give them a better chance.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like too.
But even if, certainly Thompson for the Dolphins is a lot different than Purdy starting for the 49ers. Even though they're both rookies who were taken late in the draft. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And it's a shame because and Tua shouldn't play this week. I'm not saying they should rush him back by any stretch.
No.
He absolutely shouldn't be playing. But as football fans, it's a shame we're not getting Miami with Tua and the Ravens with Lamar, especially the Ravens with Lamar, because he's a more established, he's won an MVP award, and he's a more established quarterback than Tua, and more of a veteran who's had playoff experience. Tua hasn't played in a playoff game. But I think if Miami had Tua and Baltimore had Lamar, I think we'd be looking at this weekend differently. But when 2 teams are without their 1st string quarterback and don't really have anyone behind them. Well, if Teddy Bridgewater was playing, I mean, he's at least a competent, experienced professional. It kind of just makes those games a lot less compelling and a lot less interesting.
Right.
And probably at the end of the day, a lot less competitive. And so that's kind of a little bit unfortunate. So sticking with that Dolphin game and Skylar Thompson, who we were just talking about, Paul, do you think the Dolphins have, forget winning, do you think the Dolphins have any chance of keeping this game competitive with Skylar? I'm assuming Thompson is starting, but with Skylar Thompson starting, is there any hope for my Dolphins up in Buffalo?
I want to say yes, there is, Dave, but it would really, this would have to be something where Josh Allen has 3 turnovers, and the Miami run game is just efficient, can't be stopped. There's a high third down conversion. They control the clock. But man, I don't see any scenario where it happens. I mean, except for the one I just laid out. But man, it's hard to see that happening. What do you think, Dave?
No, I totally agree. I mean, pretty much everything is not in the Dolphins' favor for this weekend. First of all, you have the whole emotional situation for the Bills. That when they returned the opening kick last week, they take the field for the first time since what happened to Damar Hamlin, and everyone's got Hamlin flags and pray for Damar, and they return the kick for a touchdown. I mean, that was just like one of the great moments of this season, and that team has something to play for. They have purpose. Put that aside, and then Miami, probably with its third string quarterback who's inexperienced and hasn't really shown very much. They might again be without their starting left tackle. Mostert got banged up, hurt his hand last week. He might not play. Tyreek and Waddle were limping around. Like, there's just no reason to think. And then you just put in the fact that Buffalo's a really good team that's kind of had Miami's number the last couple years. They haven't really had an answer for Josh Allen. Miami's defense is playing a lot better, but if the offense can't stay on the field and, Miami's defense is just out there all day, they're not going to be able to stop this offense. And, we saw what Buffalo did to New England in the first round last year. That was like a perfect game. It was the baseball equivalent of a perfect game. They didn't punt. I don't even think they had a fourth down the entire game. They just steamrolled the Patriots. And I could see, Miami's defense holding up for a little bit and then the floodgates opening in this game. And I think it's going to be ugly. The line has moved to 13. It was it opened at 10.5. And then as soon as it was announced that Tua wasn't playing, which really shouldn't have been a big surprise to anyone, it jumped to, I think, either 13 or 13.5. I don't see Miami. And it pains me to say this as a Dolphin fan. I'm glad they made the playoffs. I think that's, great that they did that in McDaniel's first year and that they were able to get that one last win that they needed. I don't see any way that they stay in this game.
Yeah,
a blizzard. With these matches. A blizzard. If there's a blizzard, which I don't think there is, that would be the one way they could stay in the game.
Hey, you never know what could happen in the next 3 days.
Yeah, that lake effect snow, right?
We know that Lamar Jackson is not going to play this weekend, Dave. But do you think Lamar sitting out gives him an edge in contract negotiations?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't really know how much. When Lamar first got hurt, they sort of said with this kind of injury, it's usually, maybe 3 weeks. And I think they were expecting him back for that Christmas Eve game initially. And that's already a couple weeks ago that he still hasn't played. Obviously, he shouldn't play if he's hurt, especially if there's a risk of aggravating the injury. And he's going to do what the doctors tell him to do. I mean, he still hasn't practiced. So I agree with you. They haven't announced officially that he's not going to play, but I think it's safe to say he's not going to play. And again, if you look at the betting line, which has moved from 6.5 to 8.5, that's a pretty clear indicator that people don't think he's going to play. At this point, the Ravens haven't scored more than 17 points in the 5 games he's missed. So I think, addition by subtraction, he's proven what he's worth because the team can't score without him. Not that they were scoring a ton with him either, but that's not so much his fault, I think, as, once they lost Bateman, the way they constructed this team, they just don't have speed and they don't have weapons. And, had a pretty thin receiver core to start the season. So I don't think it hurts or helps him necessarily by not playing. What I think is going to be interesting is just what happens in the off season with, he represents himself. They can franchise tag him, but he may really not want to be there. He may want to be there. I don't know. But I think it's going to be, that's going to be one of the very interesting stories of this offseason is, are they able to sign him? If so, for how long and for how much? But I don't think he's going to play this weekend. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely not going to play this weekend. I saw on Twitter, he tweeted out that his strain was more serious than initially thought, that it's went from a level 2 to a level 3 PCL strain. And I didn't get to read too much more than that, but that's supposed to be pretty serious. I mean, his health is the most important, and he said that his knee was still unstable. So, if he's feeling that way, then it's wise for him to sit out.
Yeah, I hear you. Like I said, I mean, a Raven Bengal game with Burrow and Lamar would be a fun playoff game, but unfortunately,
Oh
we're
man, yeah.
not going to get that. So let's talk about the last of the 3 division games, but it's actually the first one that's going to be played. And, I mentioned earlier that the 49ers swept the Seahawks this season. Seattle only scored 20 points total in those 2 games. But before this season, Seattle's had the upper hand in the series. So do you see a scenario where we talked about whether Miami could pull off the upset? We talked about whether the Ravens could pull off the upset. Do you think the Seahawks can pull off the upset?
I mean, it's definitely possible. Anything's possible, especially in the playoffs, especially in division games. Anything can happen there. They're always weird. We saw a lot of weird things happen this season, Dave. But man, just the way the 49ers are playing, the way their defense is playing, the way Brock Purdy is taking control of that offense, and you've got Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian and Deebo Samuel. I just think that's too much for the Seahawks to handle.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. And this isn't a hot take from either of us.
Yeah, I hope not
at all, because the 49ers, they've won 10 in a row. They have the number 1 ranked defense in the league. They're the number 5 ranked offense. Like the only way I could see it happening is if Brock Purdy suddenly freezes and, sort of realizes he's a 7th round rookie. But he's played really well, and he's not going up against a formidable defense. I mean, I think they played better in the second half of the year, but it's a very young defense. They ended the season ranked like 30th overall, but they did improve as the season went on, and they played better. These teams played a couple weeks ago in Seattle, which is a tough place to play. It was Purdy's first road game, and he handled it fine. They won 21-13. It wasn't their best game. He threw 2 touchdowns to George Kittle, who has 7 in the last 4. And I just think, I think the 49ers are too good on both sides of the ball. They're at home. And I think it's going to be a long day for the Seahawks. They've exceeded expectations this year, clearly. And it's been a great season for them. And they're another one like the Lions. Like, I think they have the 5th pick because of the Russell Wilson trade. So, they're a team that's ascending. Geno Smith, one of the really good stories in the NFL this year, like a 10-year veteran finally getting a second chance somewhere to start. And he's got his team in the playoffs, and, nobody saw that coming. I mean, literally nobody saw that coming this season. So I don't see it either. But crazier things have happened. So should be a good.
They sure happen. If something crazy is going to happen, it's bound to happen in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
So you were talking a little earlier about the lines, and one interesting line is the Minnesota and the Giants game, with Vegas having it as Minnesota being a 3-point favorite. Did Vegas get it right there, Dave?
So this is really, we've really touched a lot on the other 5 games. So this will be our opportunity to talk a little bit about the Giants and the Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason I think Vegas got it right, I'll give you two reasons why I think they got it right. One, this line is not moved. It started at 3 and it's still at 3. And, that leads me, usually when a line doesn't move, it means that they got it right away because it's attracting even money on both sides. And these teams just played and it was a field goal game. And, traditionally the wisdom was home field is worth 3 points. So anytime you see a 3-point line, the odds makers think the teams are even. And if you look at their records, you might say, well, the Vikings are 13-4, the Giants 9-7-1. So, 13-4 usually means a great team. Well, in this case, as I think everyone knows, the Vikings were 11-0 in one-score games. They're the only team in NFL history with at least 12 wins who's got a negative point differential. They're not a garden variety 13-4 team. That said, I think they are a good team.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some really good players on offense. They can score. They've got some quality wins. They won at Buffalo. They beat Miami. They beat the Giants. They beat teams that are in the playoffs. They also got killed by the Cowboys and they got killed by the Packers. And they lost pretty good to the Lions late in the season too. But I think they did get it right. I mean, I think this should be a close game. I think the Giants are, when we were talking earlier about the underdog most likely to pull off an upset, I think anyone listening to this was probably waiting for one of us to say the Giants, because the Giants have been like that scrappy team that is just surprisingly in games that, against teams that look better on paper, and they've pulled off some nice upsets this season. They're kind of in some ways like the Vikings. They've played a lot of close games and they've won a lot of them. Going back to week 1 where they beat the Titans in Tennessee when Tennessee missed a field goal at the end of the game. They played a lot of games that could have gone either way. Both of their Commanders games come to mind. And the Vikings played like every game they won, it seems like, could have gone either way other than week 1 against the Packers. So I think they got the line right. I'm really looking forward to watching this game. I think, my guess is this will be the highest scoring total points between the two teams of the weekend. Neither team has that good of a defense. I could see some fireworks in this one. What do you think about this game? And do you think the line is right?
Yeah, well, Dave, as the saying goes, it's better to be lucky than good sometimes, and that's been the theme for both the Vikings and the Giants this year. Minnesota has won 7 games by 5 points or less, and New York has won 4 games by 5 points or less. So yeah, I think Vegas did get it right here.
Okay. All right. Well, we're kind of getting near the end here. So let's give some predictions. We don't have to give scores, but why don't we'll go game by game, and we'll just each say who we like in that game. We'll see if we have any disagreements. Again, there are a couple games this weekend where I'd be surprised if we're not in agreement, and we've also kind of gone through the game, so we both talked about them a little bit. So we'll go in order of when the games are played. Seattle at San Francisco. I have San Francisco winning and winning big. What do you have?
San Francisco.
Okay. Second game, the Chargers at the Jaguars. I had a lot of trouble picking this one. Almost as much trouble as I had with the Dallas Tampa Bay game.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with the Jaguars for the reasons stated when we discussed that game, but it's kind of a low conviction pick for me. Who do you have in this one?
I've been talking about the Jaguars for a couple of weeks now, Dave. I'm sticking with it. With them, man. Jaguars.
Your chips are in the middle, so you have to say Jaguars. Okay. Miami at Buffalo. I like I said, I don't see how the Dolphins are competitive in this game, and I think Buffalo riding a lot of emotion, unfinished business from last year. I think they win, and they win in embarrassing fashion. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Buffalo's going to put it on them this week. They have a lot to fight for, and this is a pretty easy matchup. As much as I hate to say that.
Okay, Giants at Minnesota. I'm a Giant season ticket holder, so this one pains me a little bit, but I'm going to, and as much as I want to pick the upset here, I actually think the Vikings are going to show up and they're going to win, and it's not going to be on a last-minute field goal. I think the game will be close for a while, but I think the Vikings will handle the Giants. What do you think?
Yeah, as good as the Giants defense has played lately, I don't think they can stop Miami's offense. They've got too many weapons.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Second to last game, the night game on Sunday, Baltimore at Cincinnati. No Lamar. It's a division game. I think that the ticket for the Ravens in this one is if they can play an ugly, slow it down, not that many possessions. Their defense has played really well over the last 5-6 weeks. So I think they're going to put a little scare into the Bengals, even without Lamar. But at the end of the day, I think the Bengals win this one by, I don't think they cover, but I think they win by between 4 and 7 points. What do you see for this one?
Yeah, I think it's going to go either Bengals are going to get out to a double-digit lead early, and Baltimore's not going to be able to come back, or Baltimore will kind of keep pace with them, and the Bengals will just make one more play, and it'll be a 4 to 7 point game. But I'm going with the Bengals.
Okay, so far we have not disagreed, and I don't think we
Here
are.
It comes.
But no, I don't think so. I'm going to take the Cowboys.
Okay.
I had a ton of trouble with this game. And in my column, I took the Cowboys, so I can't really say now that I'm taking the Bucks. But I really, this is another one where I can see, like, if this game is really close in the fourth quarter, and it's coming down to like Dak having to make plays at the end of the game versus Brady, I'm not going to feel good about this pick. My conviction in this pick is that the Bucks will again come out flat. The Cowboys will get after Brady, get him off his rhythm, make him uncomfortable. I think Brady's out of Tampa no matter what happens in this postseason. And I think Dallas will get out to a lead and then will continue to come after Brady, and they'll win that way. If this is a last possession game, I really no longer like Dallas's chances. I don't know that, I think it'll end up being a 1-score game, but I think that'll be because of a kind of a backdoor touchdown at the end for the Bucks. What do you think?
I'm going Dallas as well, and you'll hear a little bit more about why in my bold call, sir.
Okay, fair enough. So let's move to that, and I'll let you go first, because you teased it. What's your bold call for the wild card round?
Dave, I was pretty surprised to hear that you didn't like Dak's chances of going toe-to-toe with Brady there at the end. That did surprise me a bit. But again, you have reason to doubt Dak because of all of Brady's late game heroics. That being said, I think the Tampa Bay-Dallas game comes down to the final seconds. Brett Maher wins the game for Dallas and ends Brady's career.
Now, that's a good bold call. And it's funny because in my column this week, the only kicker I mentioned was Maher. And I said, if it comes down to the end, he's, other than Justin Tucker of the kickers still in the playoffs, he's, probably the best from really long range, like 60 plus. So, part of Dak has thrown an interception in 7 straight games, and he's thrown 11 in those 7 games. That's really what worries me about him is the mistakes he's been making, and he can't afford to make them in this game. And I'm a little worried that that he doesn't have that kind of game in him. But I think if the Cowboys, establish the run, use all their weapons, that they're the better team. I just think they're the better team. Whether that translates to them winning is the question. I had trouble coming up with a bold call for this week. I mean, I think Buffalo is going to beat Miami. I think it's going to be the most lopsided game that we see in these entire playoffs, but that's not a bold call. The Dolphins are as banged up as they are. They're the weakest team to make the playoff field, and the Bills are one of the, very best teams in the playoff field. My bold call is going to be that Kirk Cousins has a really big game and ends up with the most touchdown passes of any of the quarterbacks playing this weekend.
Oh, I like that. That's
yeah,
a good
I
one.
just, in the first game, the Giants really didn't have an answer for either Justin Jefferson or TJ Hawkinson. I know they're getting Adoree Jackson back for this one, and that'll help them on the back end. But the Vikings really, especially like indoors on that fast track, between Jefferson and Thielen and Hawkinson and Osborne and Dalvin Cook coming out of the backfield, there's just a lot to deal with. And the Giants bring a lot of pressure. And if they don't get there, that leaves a lot of guys on an island with guys they can't necessarily cover. And if Cousins has time, he can pick apart a defense. He's not in a lot of ways, he's not a great quarterback, but he has great games from time to time. And I just have a feeling this is going to be one of those games. I hope I'm wrong. As a Giants fan, I'll be very glad to come back on this pod next week and be talking about the Giants in the divisional round and saying how wrong I was about the Giants-Vikings game. But that's kind of where I see that one. So that's my bold call of the week. Big game coming from Kirk Cousins.
Just during this conversation, Dave, I'm getting more and more excited about that Giants-Vikings game.
Yeah, and it's in a good time slot too, like that late afternoon Sunday game for people who are, out doing something because they don't want to watch the Dolphins and the Bills.
Right.
Kind of like first game on Sunday that might be a terrible game. And the Ravens-Bengals game after it that hopefully will be a good game. I don't think it'll be as lopsided as the other game. And in the middle of it, we have this nice, rematch of what was just a really good game 3 weeks ago. So, I'm excited for that one as well.
Yes, sir. Well, Dave, before we get you out of here, we talked earlier about your content. Remind the people where they can find it and what they can expect from you.
Great. Twitter, I'm at PigSkinPapers, and I post all of my content there, but also you can go right to my blog, which is thepigskinpapers.com. And during the playoffs, at a minimum, I'll be writing a preview column each week, breaking down that week's playoff games. And I've got one out right now. You can go check it out at my website. Again, thepigskinpapers.com. You can pull up my wild card round preview. And then after the season, I'll have a variety of NFL and fantasy football content as well, up to and through the draft and then into next season. And for yourself, Paul.
Yeah. Dave, I wanted to say when I was working on my show sheet earlier, I started reading your column, but then I stopped because I was like, you know what? He's starting to talk about the playoffs and who he's picking, and I didn't want it to influence my decision. So I really enjoyed it, man. It's the way you formatted everything and all the information. I really enjoyed what I read.
Thanks very much, Paul. And I hope you'll go back and finish the column. Although I think this show, I kind of talked my column. So,
yeah.
Anyone who reads it will hear a couple of the things I said, but I like previewing the playoff games. I did it last year. It was a lot of fun. I forget what my record was. It was pretty good. It wasn't great. There were a couple upsets last year, and there were a lot of really close games that were tough to call and could have gone either way. So, I'll on next week's show, I'll say what my record was, both against the spread and straight up. Unless it's
Definitely.
bad, then we won't have this segment.
I hear you, Dave. As far as content goes, guys, of course, I have my Cowboys podcast. We stream live every Monday and usually every Friday. You can expect a show from us this upcoming Friday, a playoff edition previewing the Tampa Bay Dallas matchup. And then as far as any written content, I will have a Trust or Bust coming out this week as well. Playoff edition, the first playoff edition of that article. So be on the lookout there. Both will be there on Twitter. And you can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. Guys, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, Paul.
Always, Dave. Thank you.